This 2018 Chevy Bolt EV has electric power steering, and I got curious how it actually works. So I went on eBay, got an electric power steering column for a car just like this, and we're going to go inside and take it apart to see how it works. So this is just a small piece of a Chevy Bolt EV steering system. This obviously is a steering wheel with the airbag removed, and we can turn this wheel. And when we turn here, we see this piece rotates here. Now this goes to another shaft, which eventually goes to the steering rack, but we're just going to focus on this part for today. So one thing you might be familiar with if you've seen this car before is this lever is the actual tilt and telescope wheel lever. So if I pull this out, this is the telescope operation forward and back. This is the tilting, the little spring here. And this piece would be mounted under the dashboard of the car, so this piece stays fixed, and then this whole steering column can move up, down, forward, and back. These two bolts also connect somewhere to the car. I think they can actually rotate as the tilt and telescope moves up and down, is my guess. And then, before we take anything apart, let's just see what we can see with this all together. So I'll turn this upside down. You can kind of see the outline of what we're going to see inside. So this is an electric motor. This is a circuit board and a power supply controlling the motor. And then inside here is a long, thin worm gear, which is used to rotate another gear, a spur gear, on this part, this round piece. So when I'm rotating now, I'm actually making the motor turn inside here, and I'm also making this turn. For the electrical power assistance, this motor is what's helping you steer the car. There are some cars where this motor would be down in the steering rack, but this is a nice self-contained unit where the motor is pretty close to the steering wheel. I also want to just try to understand, before we take everything apart, what all the wires actually do. So the most obvious thing here is we've got these two wires, red and green one and a black one. I'm going to guess these are the 12 volt. The red and green is probably the hot one, and the black one's probably the neutral. And this is where all the power comes in here, both for powering the computer as well as actually spinning this motor that is the electric power steering assist motor. Another thing I want to show is these wires here. So this is connected to something inside this housing right by this gear. I'm going to guess that's the torque sensor. So the way electric power steering usually works, or any power steering usually works, is the torque sensor that kind of senses the deflection in the wheel. There's a small offset of you're starting to turn. It'll pick that up here in the torque sensor and then feed that torque data into this computer, which will decide how much assistance to put to the motor. Inside here, we've got this board. Everything, all the wires we saw here connect to this board. The 12 volt wire goes to this board. The torque sensor wire, at least that's what I think it is, goes to this board. And there's some other wires here. I'm guessing this is things like the CAN bus and maybe other communication with the rest of the car that also goes to here. These are some Torx security screws, 5-point security screws. So I had to buy a special bit here to take these apart. Now I've had this apart before already, so this time will be easier, but the first time prying this board out was actually quite difficult. And there was some adhesive in there, there were some other things kind of holding it in place. Oh, I've got one more screw still I gotta take out. But this time it should be kind of loosened up already. So the main thing holding it in here is these 3 pins. So the input to the board is these 2 wires doing 12 volt. The board's job ultimately is to control this motor. So the output to control the motor is these 3 pins. because this is a three-phase motor, so you need 3 output wires to feed power to the motor. There used to be solder on these pins, but I already broke that solder off, so it's easier to remove. And there you go, that's what's inside. So this board, you can look at both sides of it. There used to be this thermal paste that was, you can see it kind of stuck on here and on here. I'm assuming that's just to use this whole metal assembly to help cool the board. I now want to give a little bit of a tour of what's on the board itself. We've got this big capacitor here. It says 35 volts. This is probably the main chip that actually decides how much steering input or how much steering boost to apply many times per second. There's also many small resistors throughout this. I haven't broken down and cataloged what they do, but we could probably figure that out later. Now here's a close-up shot of what one side of the board looks like. And now here's the other side. Here's the steering torque sensor, I think, and it goes directly into this board. And then these connectors, which might include CAN, other things, also go directly to this board. Another thing I can show you is how fast this motor turns. So this worm gear is a very aggressive reduction between this motor turning really fast and the steering system turning very slow. So when I turn this steering wheel just a little bit, you can see this spins many, many times. This motor can spin very fast and then turn this very slow. I think these motors are probably hard to control within just like one revolution, so they want it to spin many times. I also have a hunch that one of the reasons this car doesn't have very good steering feel, you don't get much feedback from the road, might be because of this worm gear. It might be because this worm gear so much dampens the input coming this way from the wheels that not much feedback gets through to the steering wheel itself. I also noticed there are very few markings on here. So there's some numbers here and some other numbers here, but nothing about volts or amps or specs. It's all just where to order this. Also want to give you a close-up view of this assembly here. Now that we've taken out the board, you can see this is where these wires hang through, and then these are the pins that supply power to this motor. And so this board has multiple jobs. It's probably using this Texas Instruments chip to decide how much power to apply or how much torque to apply at any given time. And then in addition to that, it's also doing the work to take 12 volt DC and produce some voltage, maybe 12 volt, 3-phase AC. So it's also making that conversion. So that about wraps it up for this video. We have a lot more work to do on this steering rack. One of the next things we want to do is apply some 12 volt here and then start to figure out how does this torque sensor actually work and how much torque does the motor actually produce depending on what level of steering input the user provides. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and subscribe to this channel.